Have you ever noticed when you're about halfway through a painting and you're thinking, this looks so good, this looks so good. And then you keep going and maybe by the end it's lost the vibrancy and the spark and maybe it's overworked and it's not looking so good anymore. Or maybe the opposite is true and you're like, ugh, this isn't looking so great. But then by the end, you add some contrast and it might be looking better. I teach my students the 3-3-3 method, and one of the threes is the 3 principles. The 3 principles are color, contrast, and composition, and today we are talking about contrast. And there are 2 things you need to know about contrast to make your paintings be really successful and really interesting. The first is contrast in value, your lights and your darks, and the second is contrast in detail, the blurry areas and the detailed focused areas in your painting. To establish an interesting balance of contrast in terms of lights and darks in your painting, here are my recommendations. The first thing is you'll want to establish a light side and a dark side within your painting before you start. In general, your light side will have less color, a lot more white, and if you choose, a highlight color to emphasize the light side where the light is coming from. In general, the highlight color on your light side and the shadow color on your dark side will be the midtones in your paintings. The lightest lights will be white, the darkest darks will be your darkest color. That might not be black depending on the subject you're painting, but in this case, it's black. So you've established your light side, which of course establishes your dark side, and then from there I always suggest to start by painting the dark side first. I usually do this after I paint the eyes, the nose, and the ears, but I always paint my dark side first. In this case, I wanted a highlight color underneath the dark side, a peachy orange, to give these whiskers that pretty reflective property. So I put that layer down first, but then I went to town with the dark, dark, dark black and established the shadow side in my portrait. Again, the midtones, even on the shadow side, were this peachy color. Now, on the light side of your painting, in general, you're going to have a lot more white space and a lot less paint. And the reason why you want to paint that second is if you painted your light side of your portrait first, you would likely, as I have done, overpaint it. And you would have to balance that out by painting the dark side even more. Likely, you'll just end up with a flat painting. But if you paint the dark side first, you'll know exactly how much paint you need to have on your light side, and almost every time it's going to be less than you think. So once the dark side was established in this painting, I painted the light side by painting the darkest darks black, which honestly is only really in this eyebrow area and a little bit on the ear. But the midtones then were my highlight color, which I chose yellow. And then of course a little bit of gray to establish his features, his nose, his muzzle face, so you can obviously see his features, which is important for a portrait. Part 2, you are establishing contrast with blurriness and in-focus details. For portraits, it's pretty obvious what needs to be in focus. I always pick the eyes and the nose and muzzle area, and the ears are mostly in focus, but ears are cool in that way that you can kind of have fun with them and play it on a portrait by portrait basis. Once those in focus areas are painted, the eyes, the nose, the ears, the whiskers, then you can kind of have fun and have the rest of it be suggested, be blurry. And this is where you let watercolor shine. I like to do splatter and paint runs and drips and blooms and just establish this contrast in blurriness and in detail by allowing watercolor to do what it does best, which is be watery. Now, you could, if it's your style, have the entire portrait be in focus, very detailed, photorealistic, and there's nothing wrong with that. But it's just my personal preference and what I've learned over my painting career that it's a lot more interesting, to me at least, when my portraits have that balance, that contrast of focus and blurry. I have 2 more videos on the way about the other 2 principles where I break down color and composition, so make sure you check those out. employing these 3 principles in your pet portraits and in your watercolors in general can really bring them to the next level. And if you're curious about the supplies I love to use, including the colors I love to use in my portraits, I have a supply list waiting for you at paint333.com. If you struggle with painting black animals, like this guy right here, turn into this guy right here, I have a video all about how I paint black animals. And if this video was helpful for you, give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to my channel if you love to paint watercolor pet portraits like me. Thanks for watching, don't you know?